The smell is the first thing you notice in my world. It's a mix of sharp pine, earthy oak, and the faint, metallic tang of lubricating oil. It's the smell of honest work, of something real being coaxed from raw material. Tonight, like most nights, that smell was my only company, trapped with me under the cold, buzzing hum of the fluorescent lights in my rented workshop. It was almost 11 p.m. My back was a fireworks display of dull, aching pain, a constant reminder of 13 years spent hoisting lumber and wrestling with machinery. I guided the orbital sander over a wide plank of maple, my hands moving in slow, practiced circles. The wood, destined to become a countertop in some stranger's kitchen, was smooth as still water under my touch. This was my sanctuary. In here, there was only logic. There was the wood, the tool, the plan. Cause and effect. No gray areas, no emotional blackmail. My phone buzzed against the workbench, the vibration rattling a nearby jar of screws. I ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent. I sighed, switched off the sander, and the sudden silence felt heavy, expectant. The screen glowed with my mother's face. "Hey, Mom," I said, my voice rough with sawdust and fatigue. "Leo, honey, thank God you answered," she began, her voice a familiar cocktail of forced cheerfulness and underlying panic. "I'm so sorry to bother you so late. I know you're working hard." I leaned against the workbench, already knowing where this was going. "What's wrong?" "It's just, you know that credit card, the one for emergencies? Well, the bill came, and it's a little higher than we expected. Your father's prescription costs went up again, and—" She trailed off, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. "How much?" I asked, closing my eyes. "Just a little over 700. 730, to be exact. If we don't pay it by tomorrow, the interest rate will just be criminal." I didn't ask what the emergency was. I knew there wasn't one. It was just another Tuesday. I pulled up my banking app. My savings account, the one labeled workshop down payment, stared back at me. It was supposed to be my escape hatch, the ticket to owning my own space instead of renting this glorified garage. I typed in the amount, added her account details from memory, and hit send. "It's done," I said. "Oh, you're a lifesaver, Leo. Truly. Your father, and I don't know what we'd do without you. You've always been the responsible one." The words were meant to be a compliment, but they landed like a lead weight in my gut. Responsible. It felt less like a virtue and more like a life sentence. After we hung up, I didn't go back to the sander. I walked over to my old metal locker and pulled out a worn photo album. I stopped at a picture of me, maybe 10 years old, standing next to my dad in his old auto shop. He had one arm draped over my shoulder, a grease-stained rag in his other hand, and a wide, proud grin on his face. He was a mountain of a man back then, smelling of steel and motor oil. He could fix anything. When the plant shut down and his shop went under, something inside him shut down with it. He never quite found his footing again, and that proud man was replaced by a ghost who haunted the recliner in the living room, his world shrinking to the flickering images on the TV screen. I'd been 19 when I quit community college to work construction. I told everyone it was because I wanted to make real money, but the truth was I was trying to fix him. I thought if I could just take the money worries away, if I could become the provider he used to be, maybe I'd see that proud grin again. Maybe he'd look at me with the same respect he used to have for a perfectly tuned engine. I put the photo away. The man in that picture was a memory, and I was still paying for it. A month later, I was sitting at my parents' dinner table, the air thick with the smell of roasted chicken and my sister's expensive perfume. Chloe was flashing her new engagement ring like a traffic signal, the diamond catching the light and throwing tiny, obnoxious rainbows across the room. Her fiancé, Blake, a guy with a haircut that cost more than my weekly grocery bill, was holding her hand and talking about synergy and scaling their brand as a power couple. "It's going to be the event of the season," Chloe announced, her voice dripping with self-importance. A statement. Not just a wedding, but a launch. I just nodded and pushed a dry piece of chicken around my plate. Blake looked at me, a slick, condescending smile on his face. "Leo, right? Chloe tells me you're a carpenter. That's cool. Very artisanal." "I make furniture," I said flatly. After dinner, as I was getting ready to leave, my mom put a hand on my arm. "Leo, honey, Can we talk to you for a second? In the kitchen. It was the tone she used when she was about to ask for something big. In the kitchen, Chloe, Blake, and my parents were waiting. It felt like an ambush. My dad, Mark, started looking at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. Son, we're all so happy for Chloe. She deserves the best. And this wedding, it's a big deal. A chance for her to make connections. We found the most perfect venue. Chloe jumped in, her eyes wide. It's this incredible estate by the lake. But they require a non-refundable deposit to hold the date. And it's significant. I waited. Here it comes. 15,000, Blake said, as if he were discussing the weather. Just to lock it in. The room was silent. I could feel the collective weight of their expectation pressing down on me. We were thinking, my mom said softly, if you could just front us the money. As a loan, of course. We'll pay you back as soon as the wedding gifts start coming in. You know how generous Blake's family is. A loan. They called them loans, but we all knew the money only ever flowed in one direction. I thought about my workshop account. 15,000 would gut it. It would set me back at least another 2 years. I must have hesitated too long because my dad finally looked at me. His eyes were pleading. Leo, you're the rock of this family. You always have been. Your sister needs this. I'm proud of the man you've become, son. So proud. He knew exactly which buttons to push. It was the benediction I was always chasing. The validation. My shoulders slumped. Okay, I heard myself say. Okay, I'll do it. Relief washed over their faces. Chloe hugged me, her perfume suffocating. Oh, thank you, Leo. You're the best brother ever, she chirped. Oh, and since you're so good with all that computer stuff, would you mind setting up the wedding website? Just a simple thing for the RSVPs and all that. It would be a huge help. I nodded numbly. An investment in family happiness. I told myself as I drove home through the dark streets. But it felt more like I was buying stock in a company I knew was destined to fail. The months leading up to the wedding were a slow, methodical bleed. The initial $15,000 was just the entry fee. What followed was a death by 1,000 cuts, each one delivered via a cheerful text or a breathless phone call. It started with a text from Chloe. OMG, Leo, found the perfect dress, but it's couture and they need 50% down. It's only $4,000. Can you help? It's an investment in the photos. Hugs and kisses. I was in the middle of wrestling a heavy slab of oak onto my workbench when I saw it. I sent the money. A week later, a call from my mom. The caterer Blake wants is a genius, but his deposit is due Friday. He only works with the best. It would be a shame to lose him over a few $1,000s. I was eating a bowl of instant ramen at the time, my third that week. I sent the money. The band, the lighting specialist, the calligrapher for the invitations, the non-refundable deposit for a pre-wedding wellness retreat for Chloe and her bridesmaids. Each request was wrapped in the language of necessity, of once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. I stopped looking at my workshop account. It was too depressing. My dream was being dismantled, one expensive wedding favor at a time. Meanwhile, Chloe's Instagram was a fantasy land. Pictures of her and Blake at 5-star restaurants, captioned, tasting menu for the big day. Hashtag footy couple. Photos of her sipping champagne. Finalizing the floral arrangements. Hashtag blessed. Each post felt like a slap in the face. She was performing a life of luxury, and I was the unseen stagehand footing the bill. My best friend, Gavin, came by the workshop one Saturday. He'd been my buddy since high school, the one guy who saw the whole slow-motion train wreck of my family's finances. He found me staring at my laptop, an invoice for custom ice sculptures open on the screen. You've got to be kidding me, he said, pointing at the screen. Ice sculptures? Are they getting married on the surface of the sun? It's for the cocktail hour, I mumbled. He grabbed a stool and sat down opposite me, his face serious. Leo, wake up, man. This isn't helping. It's enabling. They're not just taking your money anymore. They're taking your future. This isn't a family. It's a parasite with a wedding registry. It's almost over, Gav. Once the wedding's done, it'll stop. You really believe that? He asked softly. I didn't have an answer. The following week, the stress finally boiled over. I was working on a complex joint for a custom bookshelf, a piece that required absolute precision. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my dad about needing to rent a classic car to drive Chloe to the ceremony. My hand, just for a fraction of a second, lost its focus. The chisel slipped. A deep, ugly gash scarred the face of the perfectly planed walnut. It was ruined. A $400 piece of wood gone. I let out a roar of pure frustration and hurled the chisel across the workshop. It clattered against the far wall, leaving a dent in the drywall. I stood there, breathing heavily, my hands shaking. It wasn't just about the wood. It was the realization that their chaos had finally breached the walls of my sanctuary. The noise in my head, the constant hum of their needs, had finally made my hands unsteady. They were everywhere. Amidst the financial drain and emotional fatigue, a small flicker of something good appeared. Her name was Anya. I met her when I delivered a set of custom bookshelves to her veterinary clinic. She was smart, had a laugh that made you want to laugh with her, and she didn't seem to care that my fingernails usually had a bit of wood stain under them. For the first time in years, I felt like just a guy. Not a brother, not a son, not a walking ATM. After a few weeks of easy conversation, I finally worked up the nerve to ask her out. We decided on a quiet Italian place downtown. I was nervous as a teenager. I changed my shirt 3 times. I actually felt a spark of hope, a feeling so unfamiliar it was almost alarming. The date was perfect. The conversation flowed easily. We talked about her work with animals, my passion for woodworking. She had this way of listening, of really hearing what you were saying. For 2 hours, I forgot about wedding deposits and ice sculptures. I felt normal. Then, just as our main courses arrived, my phone lit up. Chloe. I ignored it. It immediately rang again. And again. On the 4th call, a wave of cold dread washed over me. It had to be a real emergency. I'm so sorry, I said to Anya, my face burning with embarrassment. I have to take this. I stepped outside. What is it? I asked, my voice tight. Is everyone okay? Leo. Oh my God. Chloe's voice was a hysterical shriek. It's a disaster. A total catastrophe. What happened? Did someone get hurt? Worse, she wailed. The calligrapher. She used the wrong shade of gold ink on the place cards. It's antique gold, not gilded gold. It clashes with the tablecloths. The whole aesthetic is ruined. I stood on the sidewalk, the city noise fading into a dull roar in my ears. She was crying over the color of ink. Chloe, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I'm on a date. I don't have time for that, she snapped. This is my wedding. You need to call her. You're good at talking to difficult people. You need to make her fix it. Tonight. I hung up the phone. I didn't yell. I didn't say another word. I just stood there for a full minute, feeling the fragile bubble of my own life pop and vanish. I went back inside. Anya looked at me with an expression of such gentle, sad understanding that it was almost worse than pity. Family emergency? She asked softly. Something like that, I said, sitting back down. But the magic was gone. The easy conversation was replaced by a strained silence. I was no longer the interesting carpenter. I was the guy with a chaotic family, the guy who had to be bailed out of his own life. I drove her home an hour later. She thanked me for the evening, but we both knew there wouldn't be a second date. As I drove back to my empty apartment, I wasn't angry. I was just tired, bone tired. I realized that my family wasn't just costing me money and my dream of a workshop. They were costing me chances at happiness. They were costing me a life. And I was letting them. The week before the wedding was the final turn of the screw. My parents insisted on a final planning dinner at a ridiculously expensive steakhouse downtown, a place where the water cost more than my lunch. The purpose, they said, was to go over the timeline for the big day. I knew the real purpose was to make sure I was still on board, still the reliable beast of burden. I came straight from the workshop, not having time to go home and change. I was wearing my work pants, a clean but faded flannel shirt, and my steel-toed boots. A faint scent of sawdust probably clung to me like a second skin. When I walked in, they were already seated in a plush, red leather booth. My parents, looking anxious, Chloe, glowing with a kind of manic bridal energy, and Blake, looking smug and immaculate in a tailored blazer. I slid into the booth, feeling grubby and out of place. The waiter looked at me like I had wandered in from the wrong side of the tracks. Leo, darling, You made it, my mother said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. For an hour, I listened to them talk about things that felt like they were happening on another planet. The seating chart drama, the timing of the string quartet, whether the champagne toast should happen before or after the first dance. I just nodded along, a ghost at their feast. Then, Chloe turned to me. So, Leo, about your role in the day. We were thinking you could be at the venue early to help coordinate with the vendors. Make sure the ice sculptures are set up right, that sort of thing. You're so good at logistics. Sure, I said. What time do you need me there? Blake cleared his throat and leaned forward, placing his perfectly manicured hands on the table. He looked at Chloe, then at me, his expression a mixture of pity and condescension. Actually, mate, he began, his voice smooth as silk. We've been talking, and we think it might be best. Well, how do I put this? The wedding has a certain vibe, a specific aesthetic. It's very high-end, you know? A lot of my clients and Chloe's influencer contacts are flying in for this. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Chloe jumped in, refusing to look at me. It's just, you're a bit rough around the edges, Leo. We love you, but you'll stick out like a sore thumb next to our guests. It would be better if you just stayed behind the scenes. You understand, right? It's my special day. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at Blake. I slowly lifted my head and looked directly at my father. This was it. This was the moment. I searched his face for a flicker of protest, a shake of the head, a word of defense for his son. I was begging him with my eyes. Say something. Be the man from the photograph. Be my dad. He didn't. Mark, my father, looked down at his half-eaten steak, picked up his knife, and carefully cut another piece. The polished silver scraped faintly against the porcelain plate. That was his answer, a silent, gut-wrenching betrayal. In his silence, he co-signed their verdict. I was not good enough. I was an embarrassment to be managed, not a son to be celebrated. My mother rushed to fill the void. Don't be so sensitive, Leo. It's not personal. It's just about the optics. Don't be selfish and ruin this for your sister. Selfish. The word bounced around in the echoing cavern of my chest. I had given them my youth, my dream, my future, and I was the one who was selfish. I didn't explode. I didn't raise my voice. The rage I expected to feel wasn't there. It was replaced by something much colder, much clearer. It was the chilling calm of a final, irreversible understanding. The contract was broken. I slowly slid out of the booth. I placed my cloth napkin neatly on the table. Excuse me, I said, my voice even. I have to leave. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them sitting in the warm, expensive glow. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to look back for. The drive home was silent. I didn't turn on the radio. The usual chaos of my thoughts was gone, replaced by a profound, unnerving quiet. It wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of a house after the storm has passed, leaving nothing but wreckage behind. When I got to my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat down on my worn couch in the dark, the city lights painting shifting patterns on the wall. I didn't think about the money. I didn't think about the insults. I didn't even think about Chloe or Blake. My mind was filled with a single, repeating image. My father, staring down at his plate, choosing his steak over his son. That was the betrayal that mattered. Chloe was just selfish and Blake was an idiot. But my dad, he was supposed to be my foundation. I had spent 13 years trying to rebuild his pride, thinking that if I propped him up, he would eventually be strong enough to stand with me. Instead, he had let them saw through the legs of the very chair I was sitting on. The promise I had made to my 19-year-old self, to fix things, to make him proud, had been a fool's errand. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, letting the years of suppressed resentment, disappointment, and hurt finally surface. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger. It was a cold, creeping tide. It filled me up, not with a desire for petty revenge, but with a need for balance, for an accounting. The scales had been tipped against me for too long. It was time to put them right. Sometime before dawn, I got up and walked over to a dusty box in the corner of my closet. I pulled out the old photo album and opened it to the picture of me and my dad in his garage. I looked at the smiling, proud man in the picture for a long time. Then, I gently tore the photo from the page, ripped it cleanly in half, and dropped the pieces into the trash. The promise was broken. Not by me. When the sun finally came up, casting a gray light into my apartment, I felt like I had aged 10 years. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a crystalline, diamond-hard clarity. The emotional storm had passed, and in its wake, it had left a man I barely recognized, a man with a plan. I went to my laptop and opened it. My movements were deliberate, precise. I opened the folder on my desktop labeled Chloe's Wedding. Inside was everything. Every invoice I had paid. Every contract I had signed. And, of course, the master file for the wedding website I had built for them, complete with the administrative login for the RSVP system. It contained a neat, alphabetized list of every single guest, along with their email addresses. They had wanted me to be good with logistics. They had wanted me to stay behind the scenes. I was about to give them exactly what they asked for. The next 2 days were a blur of quiet, focused activity. I became a machine of methodical deconstruction. The same precision I used to cut a dovetail joint, I now applied to dismantling my sister's fantasy wedding. There was no anger in my voice, no emotion at all. Just the calm, detached efficiency of a man with a task to complete. My first call was to the venue, the Lakeside Manor. A cheerful event coordinator named Brenda answered. "Good morning, Lakeside Manor, Brenda speaking." "Good morning, Brenda. This is Leo Marino. I'm calling regarding the Blake Marino wedding scheduled for this Saturday." "Oh yes, Mr. Marino. We're so excited. The grounds are looking perfect. Are you calling to confirm the final head count?" "No, Brenda," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I'm calling to cancel the event." There was a stunned silence on the other end. I'm sorry. Cancel? The wedding is in 4 days. I'm aware of the date. Circumstances have changed. I am the signatory on the contract and the source of the initial payment. I am exercising my right to cancel. According to Section 7B of our agreement, a cancellation within this window forfeits 50% of the deposit, and the remainder is to be refunded. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct, but Mr. Marino, is everything all right? Everything is perfectly fine. Please proceed with the cancellation and wire the refund to the account on file. Thank you for your professionalism. I hung up before she could ask another question. One down. My next call was to Exquisite Events, the wedding planners Chloe had insisted on. I had their contract in front of me. I had paid their entire fee up front, a generous gesture, my mother had called it. Their cancellation clause was ironclad. No refunds within 30 days. Fine. I wasn't after their money. Exquisite Events, this is Tiffany. Tiffany, Leo Marino calling. I'm the client for the Blake Marino wedding. I need to inform you that your services for this Saturday will no longer be required. What? What are you talking about? We have 3 trucks of floral arrangements scheduled for delivery tomorrow. I understand that may be an inconvenience, I said calmly. However, there has been a significant change of plans with the venue. You'll find they're no longer hosting the event. I'm simply giving you the courtesy of a heads up so you don't waste the trip. I could hear her sputtering as I ended the call. The band, the caterer, the lighting company, the ridiculously expensive photographer. I called them all. The conversations were largely the same. To those I had fully paid, I informed them the event was no longer happening at the scheduled venue. To those still awaiting a final balance, I informed them that, as I was no longer involved, they would need to seek payment from the bride and groom directly. I knew my parents and Chloe didn't have a dime to their names. The balances would go unpaid. The services would not be rendered. With each call, I felt a chain link snap. I was cutting the puppet strings, not with a pair of scissors, but with a pair of industrial bolt cutters. I was not just taking my money back. I was taking back my power, my peace, my name. I was erasing myself from their narrative, and in doing so, I was ensuring their narrative could not exist. Saturday arrived, bright and painfully beautiful. The kind of perfect late spring day that wedding dreams are made of. I imagine the scene. My parents beaming with false pride. Chloe, a vision in a dress I paid for. Her face a mask of bridal perfection. Blake, looking like a Ken doll, ready to acquire his trophy wife. I imagine the guests, all their high-powered friends and clients, driving up the winding road to the Lakeside Manor, expecting champagne and canapes. I spent the day in my workshop. I didn't check my phone. I put on some old blues music, the volume loud enough to drown out the world, and I went to work. I picked up the piece of walnut I had scarred in my anger and frustration. Slowly, patiently, I began to fix it. I cut away the damaged section, preparing to inlay a new piece to make it whole again, different but stronger. Around 2:30 p.m., the time the ceremony was supposed to begin, I allowed myself a small, cold smile. That's when the first calls would be happening. I could picture it perfectly. The line of luxury cars pulling up to the magnificent iron gates of the manor, only to find them chained and padlocked. The confusion. The first annoyed guest calling my parents. "Mark, what's going on? We can't get in." My father's confused reply. The call to the venue manager, who would politely inform him that the event had been canceled days ago by the primary payer, Mr. Leo Marino. Then the frantic, cascading panic. The calls to the wedding planner, the caterer, the band. Each call a fresh wave of horror, confirming that their entire, carefully constructed fantasy had evaporated. But that was only the beginning. That was the private humiliation. The public one was yet to come. At exactly 3 p.m., an automated email, which I had scheduled 2 days prior through the wedding website's administrative panel, was sent to every single guest on the RSVP list. The center was listed simply as the Marino and Blake Wedding Committee. The subject line was concise and professional. Important update regarding the wedding of Chloe Marino and Blake Aston. The body of the email was brief and devastatingly neutral. Dear guests, due to unforeseen and insurmountable financial circumstances, we regret to inform you that the wedding ceremony and reception for Chloe Marino and Blake Aston, scheduled for today, May 25th, has been canceled. We sincerely apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused, especially to those who have traveled a great distance to be with us. For those who have asked about the couple's journey, a brief timeline and financial ledger have been made available for clarity. Thank you for your understanding. Below the text was a single, clean link. The link didn't go to a gossip site or a page of angry text. It went to the official wedding website I had built. But the homepage was different now. The smiling photos of Chloe and Blake were gone. In their place was a simple, elegant page with a black background. At the top, in white letters, it said, "The Wedding of Chloe and Blake, a Financial Chronicle." Below was a simple, downloadable PDF file. It was a cleanly formatted spreadsheet. It didn't have my name plastered all over it. It just had dates, vendor names, and amounts, with a final, staggering total at the bottom. $52,800. The source of the funds was listed simply as family contribution. It was open and shut. I didn't editorialize. I didn't accuse. I just presented the facts. I used their own desire for a public spectacle against them. I had given them their audience, and I had given that audience the full, unvarnished truth. The final curtain had fallen, not on a wedding, but on a lie. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was, as Gavin put it, biblical. The story ripped through their social circle like a wildfire. The combination of the public cancellation and the quietly damning financial ledger was a kill shot to their reputation. Gavin kept me updated. Blake, faced with a social media apocalypse and a fiancé with no actual money, had vanished. He'd packed his bags and broken off the engagement via text message, apparently claiming he couldn't be with someone whose family dynamics were so toxic. The irony was richer than any cake they would have served. Chloe's influencer career imploded. She was a laughingstock. Her tearful posts about overcoming adversity were met with ridicule and memes. My parents had gone aground, ostracized by the very people they were so desperate to impress. Their carefully curated world of suburban respectability had been shattered. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I mostly just felt quiet. The constant noise in my head was gone. The only direct contact came about a month later. It was a single text message from my father. I saw his name pop up on my screen, and my heart gave a single, hard thump, a ghost of the old reflex. The message read, "You destroyed this family. I hope you're happy." I stared at the words for a long time. The man who had been silent when it mattered was now trying to cast the final stone. There was a time that message would have gutted me, sent me spiraling into guilt and self-doubt. But now, nothing. It was just words on a screen from a man I no longer knew. I held my finger down on a message, selected delete, and then blocked his number. I did the same for my mother and sister. The legal troubles they brought on themselves were the final nail in the coffin. In their desperation after the cancellation, my parents had tried to forge my signature on a high-interest loan application. It was a clumsy, foolish move, and it backfired spectacularly. They ended up with probation and mandatory financial counseling. Chloe, as the primary beneficiary of the attempted fraud, got a harsher sentence of community service and a hefty restitution order. The universe, it seemed, had its own way of balancing the books. 6 months passed. The silence from my former family was absolute, a void I no longer felt the need to fill. The money that the venue and a few other vendors had refunded, combined with what I'd saved by cutting the financial cord, was enough. I wasn't in the old, rented garage anymore. I was standing in the middle of my own space. A proper workshop with high ceilings, a solid concrete floor, and big windows that let the afternoon light pour in. It wasn't huge, it wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The deed was in my name, and my name alone. I was unrolling a set of architectural plans across a large workbench. They weren't for a client. They were for me. A small, efficient living space to be built in the loft above the workshop. The front door opened, and Anya walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She had called me a few weeks after the event. She'd heard whispers of what happened, and simply said, "I'm sorry you went through that. But I'm glad you stood up for yourself." We started over, slowly, honestly. She handed me a cup, the warmth seeping into my hands. She peered over my shoulder at the blueprints. "It's going to be beautiful, Leo," she said softly. Her words weren't just about the building. I looked around the workshop at the raw lumber stacked neatly against one wall, at the tools hanging in their proper places, at the sunlight glinting off the sawdust motes dancing in the air. For years, I had poured my energy into propping up a hollow structure, a house of cards built on lies and expectations. It was exhausting. Now, for the first time, I was building my own home, not with money or obligation, but with oak and steel, with sweat and sunlight. I could feel the solid foundation beneath my feet, a feeling so real, so undeniable. And in my chest, where there used to be a constant, dull ache, there was now a profound and unshakable peace. I was free.